Welcome to Inspiration Inc. We have a very inspirational person with us today. We have Mr. Keki Mistry from HDFC with us. Sir, thank you so much for joining us, and it's a pleasure having you on this show. As the name goes, we are going to talk about your professional journey and also about your personal journey. But first of all, what I would like to ask you is that when you started your stint at HDFC Limited, now obviously you started at a junior level. You started in 1981. Yeah, 81. So did you imagine that you will reach right at the top when you started at HDFC? Because you already had two stints before that, including HUL.
No, I had only one stint before that, which was for a very short period of time. I'd worked for 2 years with Taj Indian Hotels, and then I left Indian Hotels and joined HDFC. So I joined HDFC as Assistant Manager Accounts. My core competence or my love was always finance. So numbers, finance, anything to do with numbers excited me always. So it started off as Assistant Manager Accounts, then it became Manager Accounts the next year in 1982. Then I was Chief Finance and Planning, then I took over personnel also for a while, and it was a variety of different roles. I joined the board of HDFC in 1993 as an Executive Director, and then in 2000 I became Deputy Managing Director. 2000 I became Managing Director, and in 2009 I became Vice Chairman and CEO. So that's the background. That's how it happened.
So how was it, because when you started your stint in HDFC, those days this housing finance sector itself in India was not fully formalized, and obviously HDFC was a dominant player, but people were still not, and especially in tier 2 and tier 3 towns, people were still not very
comfortable taking loans.
Yeah. So during those days, I mean, if you can share
the early days were very challenging. It was challenging not just from an asset perspective, it was more challenging from a liability perspective, because we had to convince people to lend money to us. Since housing finance was an unknown commodity, unknown kind of business at that time, people were worried that if you give a loan, if someone gives us money and we lend out that money and are not able to recover it, then how are we going to pay back the lenders? So raising money in the early 80s or in the late 70s and early 80s was a serious challenge. We got our first loan from, our first real break we got money from LIC. LIC gave us a 10 crore rupee loan. And then we got a $4 million loan from IFC. That loan turned out ultimately to be the most expensive borrowing we ever did, because in those days there were no sophisticated hedging technology that was available, and you had to keep doing forward contracts for every 6 months. When we drew the money, the exchange rate was 100 rupees for $12.56064, which is 7 rupees and 96 paisa to a dollar. The number is etched in memory. And when we paid back the loan, the exchange rate was 17 rupees to a dollar.
My God.
So we not only had to pay interest, we also lost out on the exchange. But that loan gave people the confidence that if IFC can lend money to HDFC, then why can't others lend money? So that really helped us sort of take off.
So initially, I mean, how was it interacting with the customers and convincing them that they can take this route if they want to buy a home and all in those days? How was it?
I think people were generally a little skeptical about borrowing, or a little nervous about borrowing money. Some people did not like to be seen in our office borrowing money, because they thought, what will the neighbors think if they are seen in our office asking for money? So we understood the problem. We took people aside. We made them sit in separate rooms so they had their privacy when they talked to us. But I think it changed very, very quickly. So the confidence came back. People started looking at money. I don't think that debt averseness, which was so prominent in the late 70s and early 80s, just went away over a period of time.
Yeah, in a way.
But even today, a lot of people like to pay back their liability quickly. So even though our average term of a loan is 13 years, on a duration basis, the duration is only about 5.5 years, because of two reasons. One is all loans are amortizing loans. So the moment you get a loan, you start paying back the loan through an equated monthly installment, which starts the next month. And the other reason is prepayment. And we've seen historically over the last more than 20 years, that anything between 10% to 12% of our loans outstanding at the beginning of the year tend to get prepaid during the year. And these are not prepayments because someone is refinancing the loan. Most of these are prepayments because someone does not want to continue with the liability. He wants to pay back his liability as quickly as possible. A lot of these are part prepayments, so you get a bonus at the end of the year. You use that bonus to reduce your liability to make a part prepayment of the loan.
Right. But if we sort of draw a parallel between the journey of HDFC and somewhere the journey of India as a nation, I think HDFC and you have played a very, I would say, role of an engine as far as this housing sector is concerned, because one, it was not a formal sector in those days. In a way, HDFC formalized it. And also, it almost created a new vertical for rest of the companies to follow. When you look back, what kind of satisfaction you get out of that? Because it encouraged so many other companies to enter this business, which was so far unexplored.
Which is true. We actually helped create our own competition. If you go back to the 80s, State Bank of India, Canara Bank, variety of other public sector banks wanted to do housing finance, and they wanted to set up a separate company to do housing finance. And HDFC got into partnership with these banks to start a housing finance company. So we actually created competition for ourselves, and we did it intentionally because we wanted housing finance to spread across the country. Of course, over the years, it has really spread across the length and breadth of the country, and today, even in the smallest of towns, smallest of villages, housing finance is available.
That's true.
We've kept our growth well. We've always targeted a growth which is in the range of 15 to 18% year after year, and we have consistently grown at a rate which is in that band, a little higher than that band, and this I'm talking of the last 30 years or more.
So, in fact, since you mentioned growth, I wanted to ask you this question, that what makes you as an individual and HDFC as a company so conscious about the qualitative growth? Because we have seen a lot of cases where a lot of companies tend to chase growth or tend to chase numbers, and in the process, sometimes what happens is
lose their sense of caution.
Yeah.
No, it's something which we've conveyed to our investors for years, and for the last years, for so many years. I remember meeting institutional investors in the 90s, early 90s. I've been meeting institutional investors, or we as HDFC have been meeting institutional investors right from the early 90s, 92, 93, when the Indian economy started opening up. And most of these institutional investors at some point of time used to say, why don't you grow more aggressively? Penetration level of mortgages in India is so very low. Today, housing loans constitute 10% of the GDP. In the early 90s, housing loans would have been 2% of GDP. So penetration has increased from 2 to 10%, but in China it is 22%, in the US is 63%, in the UK is 68%. So by comparison, in India it is still very low, even though the growth in the housing finance business has been so very strong. So we, when ICICI, for example, became a bank in the early 2000s, they went for pretty aggressive kind of growth. And a lot of our people, a lot of our investors would come to us and say that, look, you're losing market share because ICICI is growing. ICICI was not doing housing loans. Now they are doing housing loans. They are growing. They are taking away your market share. And we consistently told our investors for the last, and we've been telling this ever since I can remember, that we have 4 objectives we set for ourselves. Our first objective is to give quality loans, focus on asset quality, which is reflected in the fact that right from 1981, 1977 when we started, till today in 2019, our total loan losses, money we've not been able to recover, we had to write off, has been only 8 basis points of what we've disbursed cumulatively. And this is in history, not in 1 year, over this period, over 40 years. Our second target was revolved around operational efficiency. And we said that we will continue to focus on operating systems, we'll continue to better our systems, reduce our costs and things like that. And that is reflected in the fact that, for example, for March 2018, our cost-income ratio stood at 7.6%, which is actually one of the lowest cost-income ratios that you will see in the financial sector, not in India, not in Asia, probably in the world, or one of the lowest. Our third focus was on growth. It was not that we were not on growth, but we never chased market share. We believe that in the financial services business, getting market share is never a challenge.
Correct.
When you're in the business of lending, there is no dearth of people who will want to borrow money from you. So if you sacrifice margins, or if you sacrifice your appraisal norms and start giving weaker quality loans, you can grow as fast as you want. But that is not a recipe for long-term success. And in the medium term, you will start facing difficulty because the loans you've given out in the past, you will not be able to recover. So we said we will never chase market share, but we will want to grow at a pace that we will set for ourselves each year, looking at what the market conditions were. And the fourth focus we had was on profitability. Profitability as measured in terms of return on equity. And of course, at the top of everything else was customer service. So we said that we must focus on customer service. Customers are really everything to us. We worked on customer service, we focused on customer service, we let every single employee in HDFC go through programs on customer service. And this is not today or yesterday, this was done in the late 70s and early 80s when we had no competition whatsoever.
Right. You know, before we move on, I want to ask you a personal question. When you joined HDFC, now obviously because you were a chartered accountant and there were many other options also in front of you, what made you take up this particular job? Because one, it was, I would call it a sunrise sector. At that point, it was a sunrise sector, and it was, the industry had just started as far as housing finance is concerned. So was there ever that doubt or thought in your mind that probably you should explore some other options or look at some other options?
There was never a doubt in my mind. There were offers that came my way in the 80s and early 80s and mid 80s and things like that. Offer from foreign banks, for example, offering higher salaries and stuff like that, but there never was a temptation to leave. There wasn't a temptation to leave because this was, as you said, a sunrise industry. It was an industry which was completely unpenetrated. There was no one doing housing loans. The growth opportunity in the sector was enormous. HDFC was a very young organization at that time. We were an organization where there was a lot of, I would say, a lot of people with passion, people who wanted to make things work, make housing loans more affordable, more easily available to individuals. And most importantly, we had a very good work culture, extremely good work culture. And that is something we focused on right from the beginning. We created an atmosphere, a work atmosphere, which was completely devoid of politics. And that to me is one of the biggest achievements that HDFC had over the years.
If we look at India's journey, and obviously the economy is now, obviously we are one of the fastest growing economy, but like you mentioned, when you compare to, let's say, a country like China, which started maybe a few years earlier than us as far as globalization or reforms are concerned, and the way they have picked up, because this is one sector, housing and housing finance, where you can have a large ripple effect. It can create multiple jobs, millions of jobs in fact. So do you think housing in India has been able to keep pace at the rate at which the economy has grown, or maybe the penetration should have been slightly higher than where it is right now?
My sense is housing has grown at a pace which is faster than economic growth. If you take the average GDP growth over the last 20 years, I'm not sure what the average would be, but it will be somewhere in the vicinity of around 6.5% to 7%.
It is
somewhere
around
in
that,
range. Housing loan growth has been much, much faster than that over the years. So clearly it shows that housing has grown at a pace which is faster than economic growth. And housing does give a tremendous amount of boost to the economy in a variety of ways. Housing creates jobs. Construction workers, masons, carpenters, plumbers, engineers, and so many, many more people. As people earn income, they go and spend that money, they go and consume. As they consume, demand for goods and services increases. As demand for goods and services increases, manufacturers of different products have to produce more to satisfy that demand. So it kickstarts economic growth. Also, housing supports so many industries. So whether you are looking at steel, or you're looking at cement, or you're looking at power or paint, or some of the ancillary industries associated with housing, housing supports all the core sectors in the economy and creates a variety of jobs, which in turn gives an indirect benefit for economic growth.
You are known for your calm and calculated approach in any of the crises, and I'm sure the amount of time you have spent in this industry and in the economy, you have seen so many up downs. If you can share some of those incidents or events where you actually had to step back and recalculate the entire strategy at HDFC, because I'm sure there were so many stock market crashes, then there was 2008 crash, even now we are going through one of the storms as far as NBFC is concerned. How do you manage to drive through that?
I would say 2008, 2009 was probably the biggest challenge. Because that was a time when people, for the first time in India, were actually losing jobs, and people were not sure whether when they went to work that at the end of the day they would still be having that job or not. So there was a lot of nervousness in the economy. And whilst job losses is very common in the Western world, in India job losses till that time in 2008-9 was relatively unknown. So it was something which hit people for the first time. So that created panic amongst people. And demand for housing was really one of the last things that people had in mind at a time like this. So that slowed down growth in a big way. Interest rates went very, very high. And then RBI injected liquidity and did a lot of things to bring rates lower over a period of time. So I would say the period from August 2008 up to March or April of 2009 was probably the most challenging time that one would have faced. But even during this very difficult period when there was stress in the economy, there was a slowdown in the economy, we did not see non-performing loans inch up in any significant manner. It did not happen, which shows the sincerity and the honesty and the integrity of an average middle-class Indian. That even in tiring, difficult situations, people don't default on the loans. But demand slowed down. So demand slowed down significantly. We do individual lending and non-individual lending. Our non-individual lending slowed down a lot, significantly during that period. And individual lending, actually the demand for housing loans slowed down a lot during this period. So I would say that was the most difficult time. There are going to be stages in the economy every 4 years, every 5 years, maybe every 7 years, when the economy goes through this kind of uphill, some difficulty now. Currently, as you said, it's the NBFC sector, where you have to recalibrate, look back at what you're doing, see whether you need to change your strategy, go slow at certain points of time, and things like that. So that is an ongoing process. That is something you're required to do and you have to do.
Right. What was the impact of, I would say, two major events that we witnessed in last, I would say, 5 years? One was obviously the demonetization and second was GST, because at a macroeconomy level, they were probably the largest event post 93 reforms. So what is your sense? How did it affect your sector and the overall economy?
To be very honest with you, demonetization did not in any significant manner affect our sector at all. And at a personal level, and I'm giving you a personal view, I always thought that demonetization was truly something which needed to be done in the economy, because there was so much of black money in the system, and if all these years people were saying that there is, people are not paying taxes and getting away with it and accumulating black money, and it's so unfair on the salaried class, because on every rupee of income that they earn, they pay taxes. So I think it was a right move. And it did not affect demand for housing loans at all. So if you see growth rates did not in any significant manner slow down during that period. Maybe a little bit in the period November, December 2016, but just for a couple of months. And after that, the growth came back. So demonetization had no impact. GST on real estate has had the impact of slowing down sale of property whilst the property is under construction. So people tend to wait till the property is completed and only then look to buy the house, because there is an incidence of GST that is applicable on properties whilst if you're buying the property whilst it's under construction. Now if you look at the GST rules, GST applies on the entire project, the entire property. The property has two components in terms of cost. One is land price, the other is the construction cost. The input credit that you get is on the construction cost. There is no input credit on the land cost. And therefore, in locations where the land price is higher as a component of the total price of the property, those are the areas where the sales slowdown in under construction properties is the maximum.
Correct. I'm going to ask you a couple of personal questions. Who's your biggest inspiration, or what is your biggest motivation?
Who is the biggest inspiration and what is the biggest motivation? I think the biggest motivation for My inspiration, if you ask me, was here itself in HDFC. HD Parekh was, to my mind, a big source of inspiration. I worked closely with him in the 80s, mid 80s, early 90s, and I found him to be such an incredibly calm person. In 15 years or more that I interacted, well, not 15, maybe 12 years that I interacted with him, I never even once saw him lose his cool or become impatient or anything like that. Very calm, very very calm, very balanced in whatever he did. What inspired Deepak also is someone who has inspired me over the years. What inspires me, or what sort of motivates me, is to continue growing. I mean, you have a certain goal you set for yourself, and till and until you achieve that goal, you have to keep persevering.
Right.
When you set a certain goal for yourself, you're not going to meet success straight away. You will have failures, you will get failures. Life is full of failures, and you have to get up after the failure and keep going. You take a pilot when he's flying a plane, and for no fault of his, if the plane crashes, the first thing you have to do is get that pilot on another plane and let him take off before he loses his confidence. So that's what you have to do. You have to get up from any challenge that you face, any difficulty you face, any failure you face. Get up and continue doing the same thing, and you're bound to be successful.
So what is that unfulfilled ambition that keeps you going? Since you mentioned that.
No, ambition is that to continue growing the way HDFC has been, from an HDFC perspective. I'm talking now at a official level, not
level,
a professional level, not at a personal level. Professional level is to continue growing HDFC the way we have. We've grown extremely well over the years, not just in the core mortgage business, but through the different companies that we have created, whether it's the bank, the life insurance business, the asset management business, the general insurance business, Group Finance, Credila, and that's the education finance company, and a number of other businesses. That's at a professional level. At a personal level, if you ask me, my only regret in life, if you ask me, was that I did not spend enough time with my mother when she was getting old. And in those days, she used to leave early in the morning, come back late in the evening, and the last 1 year she was bedridden. And maybe on hindsight, and she was at our house, in my house, and I should have come back earlier and spend more time. So that's the only, what should I say, regret I have in life, at a personal level.
India is a very young country, and when you speak to youngsters, so there are two thoughts. One is obviously that India is going to be a great nation, and we are going to be a great economy, booming economy, and all those things. So that's there. But the second part of it is, at an individual level, if you ask people, and especially the young generation, then somewhere they feel a little anxious, little uncertain about the future, and there's a lot of future anxiety in general also, if you see in the society around us. So what would you like to tell them, or what would be your message to those people?
See, competitiveness in the atmosphere has increased a lot, not just in India. You see this anywhere in the world. You go to the US, you go to the UK, you go to Asian countries, you will see that competitiveness amongst the younger generation increasing over time. And I think everyone wants to achieve something very, very quickly. So you have to have patience. In life, success, I told you that earlier, success does not come at one stroke. You will have failures in life. You have to set your goals from a long-term perspective, and not set your goals thinking that in 2 years after I join, I'll become a general manager, I'll become a director. It's not going to happen. So you have to have the patience, you have to have the perseverance, and carry on doing what you're doing. Do what you're good at doing. Don't do something because somebody else is telling you to do it. If you think that your natural aptitude is in arts, for example, then pursue arts. If you think your natural aptitude is in acting, then pursue acting. Don't do something which is against your passion. Do what you're most passionate about, and you're bound to be successful.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. It has been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
And all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.